for the first episode of Dualistic Unity Raw in what I consider to be season 5. The season 5, episode 1 of season 5 is going to be released on Tuesday-ish. So basically that is the official start of season 5, but this is the first Raw where our schedule has changed a little bit. The format has changed a little bit. This is going to be a slightly shorter episode because, frankly, we have a lot of stuff to do. There are things that Andrew and I would like to put time and effort into, possibly doing another workshop, being able to promote the podcast, setting up more events. There's a lot that's in the works for season 5. And so we're excited to announce all of that going into it next week. In the meantime, I wanted to talk about something, and I know Andrew is currently busy and setting up his camera, but I really wanted to talk about the importance of recognizing the ongoing process and what happens when you're not always keeping in mind that your thoughts aren't the truth, because that's what it is. If you stop paying attention to that, if you stop being aware of that, if you stop deepening your recognition of that simple thing, then your thoughts will start to reinforce themselves as truth. Because that's your brain trying to, again, establish certainty and help you survive. It's something you have to keep up with all the time. And I say this specifically because I ran across a video yesterday, and it was from somebody that we've talked to previously within the community. And they were expressing that their thoughts keep coming back when they're in situations, when they're doing just manual labor, when they're doing, work that doesn't necessarily require too much of your attention, like you're just doing the repetitive stuff. And in those moments, the thoughts just keep hitting them about their past, about their trauma, about their triggers, about their preferences, about how they're uncomfortable, about what they think about themselves, and old relationships, all of that. And it just keeps coming back and back and back. And that was the reason that they were feeling so low. And I understand that. And I want you to try and take into account, or rather try and take in a different perspective. That's where you get to do the work. See, that's where you get to do the work, where you're not actually so physically involved with something in terms of having to do something complex that it's just the background thoughts. Those thoughts aren't coming to you just because you're doing the labor. They're always there. They're always there. It's just that you're looking for something to distract yourself from them. But the thoughts are always there. You can't run, but you can look at them and understand that the only reason that they have such an effect on you is because you genuinely still believe that they reflect truth. That's all it is. That's the only way to start dissipating that energy that you're dealing with, or just start easing off the war against yourself, is to stop giving it attention as necessary. It's to stop giving your thoughts attention as though they are based in reality outside of being based in assumption. Because that's all it is. They're just based in assumption. But if you're not always keeping that in mind, then they start to creep back in. But that's the point. They're always there. It's just that they creep back into your awareness, to your attention. They creep back into your attention. That's exactly what it is. All of a sudden, they just come into your view, and you start to look at them. And you start to look at them as though they matter. And then you keep looking at them, and they keep mattering. And they keep growing. And the whole trick is to go, right, but that's not reality. And that's it. To just dare to not give a shit about this fictitious thought, even just a little bit. And all of a sudden, its hold on you loosens. But there is never, ever going to be a place where those thoughts don't exist. It really just comes down to the flame of your awareness burning away the fucking fog. That's what it is. And if you're not burning away the fog, then the fog is going to blind you.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this. I think a lot of times that concern stems from the idea that you can get it. Like you get to a point, you get to a destination basically where you're like, oh, I get it now. And it's an ever deepening recognition. Like, I think that is, I mean, that's what I've been realizing more and more myself, but that's what I see sometimes is people will talk about, the recognition of unity as a thing in itself. And it's not the thing you think. Just, it's, it's not something you point to, which we say a lot, but people can still get caught in thinking that it is, but it is just a process, like the hitting the gong and that sound that just keeps going. It doesn't even end. It doesn't end. There is no spot where you're like, I get it. No, there's no measurement like I'm at this point on the path. There is no getting it. It's just the continued process, and it's always going to be, the subtle swings and shifts and ins and outs and getting caught and letting go and letting go of the need to let go. And the process changes as you continue on. Certainly the recognitions shift, the insights get, I don't want to say deeper, but they have a different tone to them, but it's through you being willing to continue on and not settle upon the idea that I get it now. I get it now. Like I've heard that a number of times in the last couple of weeks. I'm just like, careful. Like that's going to get you caught because it's now conceptual. It is now conceptual. And so with that comes the idea that I shouldn't suffer anymore. So that belief that there is something to get creates this narrative that, then when you start getting caught back in your stuff, you're like, oh, this shouldn't be happening. I thought I got it. And maybe I don't. It's like, that's it. There's nothing. It's not something to get conceptually. It really isn't. And because we're so habitual, we're so still caught in the idea that it must be conceptual. There must be something that you're like, that's it. And until you're willing to continue to push through that, you start to see that it's like there's something, but it's not it. It's not that idea that you think it. It's never what you think ever. And I know this, we talked about this a number of times on that season 4 finale, episode 21, just about how you can't point to it. You can't say it. It really is never what you think. And yet having the conversation, you start to get this idea that it is, and you're getting it, and you're having the conversation, and you're in it. And now it's time to talk to other people about it. And it's just being you. It's just being you. And so with the, thoughts that come up because you believe there's an idea of something to get, and then you start getting back caught in the shit. Like that's a part of it. It's the ins and the outs, and it just starts to have a different tone to it. Like you still get caught in some stuff, but you take it a lot less seriously. And you start to realize, oh, this really doesn't, that whole idea that I thought I was never ever me. And so I think we've talked about it before with weed, that sort of underlying anxiety, that thing we're allowed to keep at bay, weed brings that up. And the beauty of it, as much as it's uncomfortable, the anxious feelings, the concerns, the worry and all of that, like that, it allows you to see it. And then once you see it, you can work through it. As long as you can't see it, and it's like this underlying sort of thing, you can't work through it. You can't let that go. And so that's a lot of the work when you are in that silence doing, the manual labor or something where your mind kind of has some space to think about stuff. That's when you can see what you're still holding on to. That's just you continuing to hold on to the narrative of you, basically, is what those thoughts come down to. And the belief that any of it is even some semblance of the truth of what you are, because it isn't. But seeing it allows you, that is what allows you to work through it. So you got to be able to see it. It's not about not seeing that or going through the shit. Going through the shit is what allows you to work on the stuff that you're still holding, that you may have convinced yourself that you weren't, but you know, there it is.
Yeah, but not if you cower in front of it. That's the whole point, right? It is, unfortunately, like, you can sit there feeling like you are the victim of reality, that you're getting beaten by your own awareness. And I understand that feeling. I really do. And because you believe it, it is so. That is the hardest part about all of this being your awareness, is that if you believe you're overwhelmed, that's what you experience. If you perceive yourself to be the victim of your thoughts, that's what you experience. And it really is that. It really is that. It's just allowing yourself to change your perspective of your role within all of this without having to justify it, just through recognition alone. And that's one of the things I was really enjoying about what you're saying there, Andrew, is that recognition really isn't like adding more knowledge, but it's more like the way your eye widens when you're taking in more of the view, right? That's recognition. All of a sudden, your entire awareness just widens and you're aware of more of what's always fucking been there. You're not learning more. You're just like, oh, and it's because you were distracted by shit. You were focusing on tiny little things, tiny little thoughts, little boxes that kept you from being aware of everything that's always been there. And so it really is just allowing yourself to open your eye a little bit more and take in the view that you've always been, because you're the view, right? And in doing so, immediately everything changes. Immediately everything changes. And so, yeah. So this is a really good example. This is one of my favorite examples, actually. The habit of quoting others. At some point, and it's not to say quoting others is bad. It's not a bad thing to quote others, or to throw out a little recognition for which version of you said such and such. But that's it. You're recognizing which version of you. And there is a subtle shift in suddenly thinking, oh, I remember Alan Watts said this. Did he? Did he? Did he say that? Right? Not in the way that you think he did, because there's no he. Right? There's no you. You said that. You said that. That's why, again, I love the 10 commandments. First commandment, thou shalt hold no God before me, which makes perfect sense if I'm the one that wrote it. Right? And that's the whole thing, is that you wrote it all. You've been all of it, all of these people. And sometimes you're full of shit. Sometimes you're an egotistical fuckbag. Sometimes you're a dictator. Sometimes you're an absolute douche. And then other times, when you are willing to question yourself and widen your eyes and let go of false certainty and the need for control and the need to be selfish and all that other shit, in every one of those variations, what do we come to? This. We come to this each and every time. Why? Well, because it's always there. It's always you. It's just, which version are you in? And is that version willing to look at it? And how much of that version's will is affected by the rest of all the other versions? There's so many questions, is what I'm saying, but it's never as simple as we'd like it to be. It's not about absorbing concepts or understanding, I get it now. You don't, you can't, because you are it. If to get it is the end of the fucking road, and there isn't one. And if there is one, then it's going to get boring real quick. And you're just going to go back to trying to satisfy petty desires.
Which one of them being figuring it out, that desire to figure it out. But the quote, it's funny you bring up the quotes, because like I'll still reference like Alan Watts with like front necessitates back and that sort of thing, or descriptions not to describe from Krishnamurti. But like it's not like the intricate quotes where you're pulling it and it's like, oh, my favorite quote from this. And it's funny too, because early on in my content, like that was one of the things, like I remember very early on in my TikTok when I was just posting all different sorts of shit all the time, which, I still post all different sorts of shit right now. And it's funny because like I got into just posting like insights for a while, and now I've come back to posting more about my life, which is kind of how it all started from the beginning. So it was like that was And so my whole, just like the last 3 years have just been such an interesting journey. But initially, along with just, it was just posting anything from like a recipe to a workout to vlog to, and then I started posting some of my favorite quotes from like Alan Watts or Eckhart Tolle, even, or, anyone. And so as that's kind of progressed, it's become less and less of those types of things. But so I find that interesting. But another thing I want to bring up with the recognition and the getting it is, I think we can get caught in thinking that the recognition like is something else, like it's a different thing than what we're experiencing. Like we're going to jump into a different dimension, into a different understanding. And it really is like looking through a straw and the straw just widening. It's not that the view is different, as Ray said, kind of like your eyes expanding and you're taking more view. And it's like looking through a straw and the straw just getting wider, a little bit wider, a little bit wider. Simultaneously, initially you're looking through a straw and it's really foggy. And that's where most people are when they're not willing to question and super caught up in their idea of themselves. Like it's almost like I'm thinking of it like the straw is reality, how we, outside, I'm using quotes here, outside of ourselves. And then the fogginess to clearness is the perception of how we see ourselves. And so it's simultaneously, as you're willing to question reality, which I think a lot of people start with, they start questioning like, oh, reality is totally made up. It's not what I think. That's the straw kind of widening, but then it's still sort of foggy because you still have a massive perception of yourself. So you're seeing more, but it's equally as foggy. And then as you start to see more, then you're like, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. But there's still like, you're still, it's this much as opposed to just not being a straw as much. And then as you're willing to question yourself, which usually typically I think comes after the straw widening, it's the fogginess, your willingness to question yourself is like the fogginess getting a little clearer and a little clearer and a little clearer. And so that's the imagery that was coming to me right now. And so it's what I'm trying to get across is that you're not looking at anything different. You're still looking at the same reality. You're still looking at yourself. It's just how much are you seeing and how foggy is it? Because it's not any different. You're not looking at something different. We're not jumping to the fifth fucking dimension. It's none of that fucking bullshit. We're not shifting. We're not shifting. But we are. But it's not like a completely different. You're still here now. You're always here now. It's just that shift from here and now and you shifts in how limited you think that is. You think here is just this, now is just a conceptual idea, and you are just a conceptual idea. Like they all go from the conceptual to the reality of what they are, which isn't what you think. And that's the expansion, you and here, as those expand, it's like the straw widening and the windshield getting less foggy, but you're still looking at the same thing. It's just how distorted are you? How limited of a perception of you are you taking in?
Nice. Absolutely. It's funny because once you get a good clear look at it, it's almost hard not to see, right? Like you're just like, oh, and then you're just having moment after moment of just, okay, the straw's narrow because I'm kind of narrow in terms of how I'm thinking about myself. So I can't see because I'm blinded by myself. But this goes back to something that we were talking about in a group recently. And it was, somebody was mentioning that just through the turbulence in their life and the willingness to question and the willingness to go through the constant process of just staring at everything that you are without giving into it and going through some chaos in your life, they're just having this huge transformation. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Right. And it got me thinking, sometimes often we don't need mushrooms like to wake up. It really just comes down to will. Mushrooms really do help in terms of apathy, comfort, right? Especially or if you are in chaos and you can't stop making it about you and you don't remember how to stop doing that, that's where psychedelics can be helpful, or mushrooms can be helpful. But at no point do I ever want anyone to believe that they're absolutely necessary, because they're not. They're not absolutely necessary by any means. That said, though, you have to be willing to let go of sanity. And I mean that. That's the one thing about mushrooms, or the psychedelic experience of mushrooms, is that they don't care what you think reality should be. The entire experience is what you're having right now, right? And none of your thoughts about it are really that certain. So you're like, Jesus, I don't feel certain at all. I'm just going to enjoy the experience I'm in. And that's the lesson that you're supposed to take from them as a whole. But you stop thinking, oh, I shouldn't be thinking that. Oh, that's not a normal thought. Jesus, like you stop identifying so much with all of the thoughts, or at least you have the capacity to do so. You have the capacity to do that all the time, but you have to let go. And that means you have to let go of everything you think you're certain about. You have to let go of all of the railings that you've built up for yourself over time to make you feel like you know what the fuck is going on. And that really is it. It really comes down to being willing to question everything, because it's the widening of the straw. It's the widening of your eye, right? And it only closes because you want it to, right? And often you want it to for a number of reasons. You've got all kinds of reasons to want to close it, don't you? People are scary. The world is hard. You're tired, right? All kinds of reasons to want to close your eye. But the problem is that then you stop participating in your life. You stop participating in the scenery. And I've often compared it to the reason that I recommend people learn a martial art. In general, it's that whole, it's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener in the war, that kind of thing. Like, it's good to learn it, to expand your horizons, and to go through the experience that when somebody is coming to hurt you, that you don't just cover up and hide, that you actually have a better chance in facing it. Doesn't matter how well you do, you have a better chance in facing it than just trying to duck and protect yourself, because at least then you're engaged. You might not know what the fuck you're doing, right? But that's where practice comes in. There are ways for you to feel more like you know what you're doing. Not that you have control, but that you know yourself more. So there really is a comparable lesson here. It doesn't have to be martial arts either, but I do recommend that, just for the fear that's involved with it, because there's an embodiment of the lesson in that. That's the reason that I ended up taking Kung Fu. It's the reason I explored a number of martial arts, was because it's scary, right? There's a lot of risk involved immediately when you're in a physical altercation. And so you have to deal with all of your assumptions about yourself, all of your need to make assumptions about the other person, because that's where you screw up. So you can see that there is a correlation here. Not that I'm saying that life is like a fight, but life can be traumatic. Life can be violent, if you want to look at it that way. And it doesn't have to be physically violent. It could be somebody who's just ripping apart your ego, and you not recognizing that doesn't have to hurt. It's still a violent act. It's still a traumatic experience.
Yeah, it can be incredibly uncomfortable. I definitely, I know I'm traveling right now, and probably will be for a little while, but I don't know, maybe I'll start looking up YouTube videos even, and just doing some Wing Chun on my own, just to start getting the feels, because even the practice I've done with Ray at like retreats and stuff has been, yeah, helpful, certainly. But it's funny it's funny talking about the willingness to stop staying on the ball, like the willingness to stop questioning, because like people have this idea that the process of questioning is like effort and work, and I'm not saying that it's not, but it's how you stay in reality. Like, it's just being in reality, like the reality of reality. Like, it's not this other thing. Like being lost in the idea of yourself and your concern for what other people think of your conceptual idea is being fucking lost. We're all lost. Like we're all lost in the illusion of control and concepts and ideas. Like the control doesn't exist. You can try and hold on to it. You can try and think that you have it. This isn't a change in letting go of control. It's letting go of the illusion of it. It's letting go of your idea that you ever had it. It doesn't actually change reality. And that's what I think sometimes people get caught in a misunderstanding of this conversation, is that, you know, you're letting go of something that's actually real. You're letting go of concepts. You're letting go of illusions. You're actually stepping into reality. All we're ever talking about is the experience of actually experiencing life, actually experiencing reality. And I'm only saying this like sternly because I do it. I do it all the time. The questioning is like, you know, oh, I don't know. This is getting to be a lot. It's like, motherfucker, you're staying in reality. You're finally living life. Like you're fucking living life for the first time. And you're just so used to living in the concepts and the ideas that you think that it's something so big and different. And like, relatively speaking, it is, because we're so lost in the illusion of identity. Like it's not leaving something that isn't, it's not leaving that something that's real. It's letting go of something that doesn't exist. You're not letting go of something that's real. Like you're just finally stepping into what is real. And so as people fluctuate in and out of it and they run from this conversation, they're running from reality is all that it is. Like it seems like a lot at first because you're so used to existing in a conceptual prison. You're so used to just being in your prison cell with a shitty bed that you added a mattress topper to feel a little bit more comfortable in that 8-by-8-foot prison cell. Like we're talking about just existing in reality. That's what this conversation is. It's not this crazy, like 5D spiritual bullshit type stuff. It's just existing in reality. Being caught in spiritual concepts is not being in reality. That's all this is. Being in reality, experiencing reality. And we're just so not used to it that we think that it's some like tapping into something else. It's so interesting how we can continue to do that. Like, oh, this is getting to be a lot. Yeah, you're a lot. You're a lot. You've just been limiting and living your life based on thinking that you're not. But that's not real. It's not real. Your idea of yourself isn't real. The thoughts about the idea of yourself feel real because you're experiencing them, but they're not. They're based on a fucking made up thing. It isn't real. This is reality. Existing here and now without an idea of yourself, without the concern so much for what any other idea you maintain of someone else, of even there being another person, has about this conceptual idea of you. And you're just getting caught in the concern for that doesn't exist. Like and it does, but it doesn't. But it's not like, it's not a real thing that you're maintaining. You're running back to a fucking made up illusion.
Yeah, I don't like that at all. That doesn't satisfy my needs whatsoever. And so I'm going to ignore it and I'm going to settle on something because the alternative is not. And just living in this state of, I don't know, what the fuck? I was saying to somebody recently that this is pretty much the theme of my life. And I know anybody who's listening is not going to see this, but basically this expression, hands in the air, like, I don't know. And that's pretty much how life is for me right now in general. And it's great. I fucking love it. I really do. Like whether it's up or down, whether it's hard or easy, it doesn't fucking matter. I don't know. I'm just along for the ride. And it doesn't mean anything about me personally, which means that I can really just get involved with that ride. There's way less at stake. And so there's way more reason to enjoy myself and get enthusiastic about what I'm doing. Like it changes fucking everything. I was thinking about feral children, just to take a hard right turn. And the fact that we tend to judge people who don't understand the concepts that we understand. Like the idea of feral children, we always think to ourselves, oh, those poor, stupid bastards. You know, they don't understand. They haven't learned. They can't speak. They can't do all that. I ever tell you about a movie? It was Nell with Jodie Foster and Liam Neeson. And basically it was based on this feral child that was in the bush.
So feral child, is that like a abandoned child?
Basically, a child that lives in the wilderness and doesn't have any exposure to human beings from a young age. And there have been examples of this, obviously, but there's no capacity for language. They obviously don't speak the way that we speak or anything else because they haven't learned. They don't know about utensils. They don't know about manners. They don't know about etiquette. They don't know about time. They don't know about clothing. They don't know about pretty much anything that we take for granted. And I guess that's my point, is that we take it for granted, right? And we don't understand that if I was to remove you and take all your memories away and just drop you in the forest somewhere and not, give you exposure to other human beings or anything that humans have ever created, you would start with whatever was in front of you and you would start figuring shit out. Anyway, this movie now is actually based partly on these two children who were basically feral and just created they were unattended to as they were growing up for whatever reason. And they just created their own language that only they understood. And they spoke it fluently. There was like news coverage about it and shit. I can't remember their names, unfortunately, but they just created their own language. Well, there's intelligence at work, you see, but we'd go like, oh, that's nonsense. Why? How is it any more nonsense than whatever the fuck I'm saying right now? Right? How do those sounds have less meaning or less importance or are less evidence of intelligence than the sounds that we've all agreed make the English language or whatever language you're speaking? Right? They're all ridiculous. All of it. Everything I'm saying right now, if you were to break it down, just sounds fucking ridiculous. Play it backwards. It's just as ridiculous. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, how would you know the difference? What if we all spoke backwards? Nobody would judge you for it. Think about that. All of the words would sound totally different and nobody would judge you for it. Why? Because they all agree those sounds have the same meaning, right? So it really did come down to us just using intelligence to come up with a way to convey meaning through sound. That doesn't mean that we have to know these concepts to be intelligent. We are intelligence. We've just gotten into the habit of using these as tools. And we forget that. We forget that to the point where we actually start to think it's the concepts in the language that are evidence of our intelligence.
And we've gotten so caught in this idea of normal and these made up things, basically, language that we speak as normal, and how well you can do it is how intelligent you are. And we think that intelligence is something you can measure, even like that. And as you just brought up, like that is kind of the shift, is the idea that intelligence is something you garner. It's something you maintain. It's something you build. It's something that goes up and down. Your intelligence, as opposed to you are intelligence. Like that, just that shift in the your like your intelligence versus you are intelligence. And because once you are intelligence, there is no ability to fluctuate. It's just it being expressed. And we were talking yesterday about always speaking from the whole. Like we're always speaking from the whole, and it's just how much distortion we have in the way that's shifting how the whole speaks, basically. But we're always speaking from it, and so we are always that intelligence expressed, and we build these ideas of normal, basically. And so the feral children who create the language, that's just not my conceptual idea of what intelligence looks like. But it's only because I'm maintaining in myself a conceptual idea of what it means to be intelligent or knowledgeable or normal. Like it always comes back to us. It's always us. Anytime anyone judges you for not fitting in, not being normal, it's only because of their insecurity that they're trying to maintain. They need to maintain their idea that they're trying to fit into. It's really not, as much as we like to say there's like societal norms. We are society. So we're the ones maintaining it. We're the ones thinking that way. Like if you were to come across those feral children speaking their language and you had this idea like, oh, that's not intelligent, that's weird, whatever, that's society speaking through you, because you have this, only because you have this idea of what knowledge looks like that you're trying to maintain in yourself, you're trying to live up to, you're trying to fit that, you're afraid of not fitting that. And so you are the one maintaining those ideas based on how you want to be. Because without that idea of knowledge being something you can gain, or intelligence being something that you can add to yourself, there is so much less room for the judgment of what that even possibly looks like. You start seeing every iteration of you as just being you, intelligence expressed. And that's another thing that just kind of hit me. That was hitting me the other day on the episode, was like how we like I still want there to be sometimes like not being me, not being it, like not like I am that intelligence that I'm referencing expressed, but like I am as deep as that intelligence goes. Like at the, I think yesterday, like the forefront of reality, like being it. We still like to think we're a little bit like there's something else. It's not quite me. I'm still tapping into the intelligence. I'm still tapping into it. And that's just the maintenance of the fucking idea of me. But it's it. You're it. You're it. You are at the forefront of intelligence being expressed in each and every moment. Like you are that much. And it's just a lot to recognize. But anyway, that thought just hit me at the end there. Didn't mean to deviate back away, but it's not really deviation, I guess. But anyway, pass back.
So this kind of goes back to the question of so the process of seeing beyond the illusion, beyond the ego, beyond the identity, all that. We always tend to think of it as an individual thing, like we're all on our own egotistical journeys, as it were, or we're all on our own path to questioning, or our path to looking through the fog, or our path to whatever the fuck you want to call it. It doesn't really matter, I guess is what I'm saying. But we really forget that it's not just you. It is just you, but you're everyone, which is why we're all kind of having this cultural shift. Like this conversation is growing. Like I'm happy to say that, for example, and I'm really happy about this because Andrew and I have been kind of guessing about how big our audience is based on the traffic that the newest episodes get, because we've really had no way to track how many people are watching, all of the episodes throughout the entirety of the 200 episodes that we've released. And so we've always guessed that our audience was somewhere around 1,500, 2,000 people in general. Recently, we were in conversation with another company, and we set up some more advanced analytics for our podcast traffic. And I'm happy to say that there's over 6,000 people that are listening to Dualistic Unity. There are 6,000 people that are somewhere within this conversation. And those 6,000 people are not indicative of how many other people are out there in some version of this conversation. Those are all you. Those are all other versions of you that are learning the same lesson about their identity, because it's not a lesson about each of our individual identities. It's a lesson about identity. It's a lesson about the illusion that the universe is waking up to, that you are waking up to, that we're all waking up to. It's not just you individually. So as much as you're like, wow, I'm still holding on to this. Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are. We are still holding on to this. I am still holding on to this, and we are still holding on to this because they're one and the same. Which is why in a video I released recently, I was talking about the ascension and all this shit and waiting for the universe to wake us up. And I was saying that, it goes both ways. There's the universe doing its thing, and then there's you, the universe, doing its thing. So there's participation there. There's an involvement there. But it really just comes down to one of us getting this, getting it fully, because there is only one of us. You see, that's the paradox. is that it's really all about all of us, but it's about you because you're all of us. But how much do you know that? How much can you recognize that? And how much can you recognize that the path you're on, where you think you're letting go of Andrew, or you think you're letting go of Mark, or you think you're letting go of Jazz, or you think you're letting go of Amanda, or you think you're letting go of Marie, or you think you're letting go of anybody, whatever your name is, that's not what you're letting go of. You're letting go of the fact that there is a container. You're letting go of the illusion that there's a container, that there's any idea of you that is the truth, because we are all learning that. It's just that it's a big lesson because there's a lot of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that shift is a powerful one, because it's still that perception of division that I'm letting go of me, but it's like if you see, just take the world and humans and this component of me, it's like there's a cloak of identity on top of everything, all of it, all of us. And it's not even, and so that makes the interactions with myself both important and powerful, but also not something to point at and say you, because it's like it's both all the time. So it's the interaction of me with myself, like I'm really just talking to myself right now, and there is a collective cloak, so there isn't this idea of, oh, I got to work on myself, I got to just be myself, because there is that recognition and the interplay of myself with myself playing out. And so it's a balance, but it's also not, because it's not like you just letting go of you. It's you letting go of you, because you're not just you.
God, I hope that ends up being a quote.
I don't even know what the quote would be in terms of what I just said. I don't even remember exactly what I just said, but
I think it was something along the lines of, it's not you letting go of you, but it's you letting go of you. And I just loved it. There's something along those lines, like, because basically, like, it really is context, right? Like, it really is that flip from one side to the other, where you're just like, it's not this, but it is that. And you're like, fuck, right? And it's because it's so hard to communicate. And this is what I mean by it is so hard to communicate, because there is a shift in perspective. There is a shift that happens between the perspective of a character versus the perspective of the whole. And it changes what you mean. It changes what you're seeing. It changes the entire experience of intelligence. It really does. It changes it in the same way that, you know, a teenager can't remember how they thought when they were 6. Right? Like, it really does just shift your entire perspective of everything, But that shift has to be maintained to some degree until it takes root. Anyway, it's just like anything else. It's like muscle memory, right? Like, it really is. Like, we were talking about the value of questioning concepts. The only reason we really need to do that is because we have an attachment to them. That's the only reason that we have to question them, is because we haven't been, right? Like, we've just been like settling on them. We're like, no, I like that, I'm going to hold on to that. And so that's the reason that questioning is so important. But if you're not doing that, then everything is always questionable, which means you never have to actually deliberately go and question it, because you've never actually attached to it as truth. And so life takes on an entirely different feel. All of a sudden, everything has a certain degree of ease. Why? Because you're more fluid, because you're not holding on to anything, because you're not, judging yourself or trying to evaluate yourself or doing any of that crap, right? You're just kind of drifting through your life, experiencing, participating, being enthusiastic, paying attention, doing all of that stuff without it meaning anything about you at all.
Exactly. It's been kind of interesting for me along those lines. I've had some dreams, and just not even dreams, just feelings day to day of like memories of being a kid, like when I was 6 and below, and like that feeling of what it felt like to be in that state, and memories that I hadn't necessarily, they weren't, you have those memories from being a kid that always are kind of there. They're like the ones that stuck for whatever reason. And it's like tapping into so many others that were not stuck there. And just like the feelings, like I lived in the same house from like 1 to 16. And it's been a lot of just feelings of like being in different rooms in that house, and how I felt in those situations, and like running around my backyard, and just like, even now I'm like, oh fuck, it's like, it's such a palpable feeling. It's so interesting. And last night I had a dream in my bedroom there, and it was another dream within a dream, which was interesting. I was like dreaming, and then someone was like showing me their house, and it was a different house from the outside. And then we got upstairs to where my room was, and I start looking around, and I was like, huh, this looks a lot like my room. And then it like whack, everything came into play. And then someone came in and said like, it is your room. And then it like shifted back to the just the one layer dream. And I was like, holy shit. And then I was in that for a bit, and I looked outside, and it was the same backyard and everything. And it's been interesting because that feeling of being a kid, like being 6 years old, like that's before the ideas are built, before the conceptual ideas of everything and how you fit into the world, and before, the adulthood shit starts infiltrating your reality. So it's been very, very interesting, I guess, to experience more of that. And it's kind of funny, like I haven't until now. And I know you've talked about not just Ray's lifetime, but experiencing other feelings and situations and shit. And it makes, as trippy as it may seem, like it does make sense. You're not what you think. You're not just this. So the more you start realizing that, the more it would make sense that your memory expands, because you're not just this here now, you are this here now, but all the here nows, all the iterations of here now is what you've always been forever. So yeah.
That is great. I love it. And it's funny because it's very much the process that I went through myself, in terms of the more I questioned the narrative, the more I let go of Ray, or the idea of Ray, the more I started to be able to remember the parts of my life where Ray wasn't a thing, right? Or so much less of a thing. And that's because when you're a child, your memories really are very different in terms of them being abstract. You don't remember dates and times or even names half the time, but you remember feelings, textures, smells. How the sun was shining on the lawn one morning when you woke up and you went out in the backyard to play with your toys or whatever the fuck it is, that kind of thing. Or staring at the couch cushions really up close because you're lying on the couch and you're tiny, right? And so there's the feel of the fabric, playing with the little buttons that were on the couch or whatever the fuck it was. Like all of these things, these are childhood memories. These are childhood memories because they're real. They're right in the moment. They're not involved with the narrative. And that's why it's so hard to access, is because we're always looking for narrative. We're always looking for the illusion of me in my past, but that illusion took time to build. And so my earlier experiences didn't involve it, not to the same degree. So I have to let go of them to get there. But the same is true for dreams. Somebody was just saying, I wish I could remember my dreams. Keep going. Right? It really isn't necessarily about trying to get to remember your dreams. It's not about trying to remember your childhood. It's about breaking down the illusion, breaking down the wall that stops you from experiencing those things in the same way that you experience here and now. Because you're not experiencing here and now, which is why you don't remember your dreams and the reason you can't remember your childhood.
God damn it. As we're talking, all this shit's like coming back into my mind. I'm like, holy fuck, this is a lot right now. And even just when I was in first grade, I got we had like minors and majors, which were basically when you got in trouble. And I got a major in it was first or second grade, which was the worst one to get, because there were these two girls on my bus that started like talking shit to my friend and started like spitting on him. And so like we started spitting back. And we were like 6 or 7. And yeah, we got in pretty big trouble for that. And I had to see the principal. And like I was not a troublemaker at all. Like for pretty much my whole life. I was kind of like did everything well by the book, followed the rules, like was a super easy kid to raise because I did not get in trouble. So even now, just having that memory, because I was 7, so it was like I remember the feeling of like the nerves and the shame of getting that, because it was like you had to bring home, it was like a pink slip of paper that was like 3 inches by 6 inches or something, and like to show my parents. And yeah, they never went crazy about anything like that. They were just like, they kind of wanted to figure out what happened, why I did it, and all that sort of stuff. But I can vividly remember that. Now all of these, as you were describing, the explaining the sense and the textures, like I'm back in that house I grew up in, like feeling the couch, like feeling that shit. Like I'm actually feeling it right now. And even the one smell that never left me was kindergarten. We had this like green glue that you would squeeze it, and it had this very, very distinct smell. And I've never forgotten it to this day. And I can still tap back into that. And so it's just interesting. And now I'm like seeing fucking standing in a line in first grade in the hallway, like talking to some kids, and like even having the idea of, who was my friend and who wasn't, and like hanging closer to my friends, or like wanting to be. I remember like, late in the summer when you find out which class you're in elementary school, and like, hoping that you're with some of your friends, and like just how much of a thing it was to have a certain teacher in a certain class. And it was this whole big thing, and just so much of that interplay. And then you start to recognize like where identity starts to trickle in, which is kind of like really fucking dark. But like as a kid, you start getting the sense of like me, and you feel it like starting to build and build and build. But it's a necessary aspect of ego development, of course. But at the same time, you're like, holy fuck, that's a big thing happening right there. Like just that little situation where, you felt a little shameful, or, you really liked someone, they didn't like you back. And then it was that starts to build, and you can, holy fuck, dude, this is like really trippy, because I'm just going through now different grades that I was in, and just like feeling the building. And I'm like more in second grade now than first grade. And then, moving into third grade, and just like remembering being in those classes, like sitting there, like fuck, man, I'm like, I'm looking through the same eyes, at a notebook. No, not much different. My handwriting's changed a little bit, still not necessarily amazing, but like, oh man, like I haven't left my perspective here now the entire time. And it's like just that wave of, and recognizing, because I said before, it's like it feels kind of dark, that identity building, but that's a necessary component of our development. It's just that people get stuck in that. So then seeing it build, but then now feeling like recognizing it for what it was, is just, it's fucking interesting.
Isn't it though? I think so. I think it's interesting to look back and recognize that your experience in this life has really just been the accumulation of the perspective of where you think you've been. And you're just like, yeah, I can accept that I've had those experiences. It's like, yeah, can you accept what other experiences are in there, or just the ones that you physically experienced? Right. In which case, how do you know what happened before you were born? How do you know any of the experiences you had prior to that? Maybe you've just forgotten, because once again, you're in a different perspective. In the same way, the reason you can't experience dreams, in the same way you can't remember your childhood. Maybe you've only forgotten what happened before your birth because you don't think of it clearly, because you're still making that assumption. In the same way that I was talking about the cognitive dissonance of thinking that we're human. Whether we realize it or not, there is a huge assumption in that entire statement. that I am a human being. Right? Despite the fact that both human and being together really don't mean anything except I'm here in this form, right? And that's it. Is I'm really attached to the form, and I make a bunch of assumptions based on that. But it's all just based on how I think of myself, based on how I perceive the world, based on how everybody else validates how I perceive the world. And there's just a whole thing that we've entirely forgotten, built up over time. It built up over time. That's all it is. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it's enabled us to have fucking cool conversations. Like, that's the nice thing about concepts, is the fact that you can experiment with a lot of different things. I mean, look at all the religions that we've created. Look at all the different types of technology we created. Look at all the different types of cultures that we've created, all of which had different beliefs, all of which had different perspectives, all of which had different priorities, all of that. That's the entirety of the universe, is everything that could be expressed. And it has to be expressed in a certain way. It has to have a motivation, right? We have to have a motivation to become all of these different variations. And what better motivator is there than the illusion of identity?
So, so when you say that last part, the motivator, the illusion of identity of all the iterations, like what do you mean by that?
So if there's a variation of you that must exist, that is completely controlling, absolutely insecure, power hungry, intelligent, and so on and so forth, how would you become that variation if not through overcommitment to the illusion of identity? So it's necessary to the experience.
Because in all the variations that could be, it's like we can't jump to the point of being an incredibly egotistical piece of shit. There has to be a path kind of to get to that. There has to be things that are like tools to utilize the ability to go from being infinite intelligence to being caught in an illusion, to being caught in the conceptual idea.
It's what we are, somewhere in the spectrum. Somewhere in the spectrum between totally caught up versus not caught up at all.
And because those tools, the tool of identity is necessary in order to create that variation, it's on the table for all of me all the time, for everything that I am forever. It's always on the table, because in order to, at one point, like some iteration of me to get to the point of like extreme ego dictatorship type deal, that tool, there has to be a number of tools to like, all right, this one, and not to get too formulaic, but like this plus this plus this equals, Hitler or Stalin or something. But that's on the table for all of me all the time. And there's like a massive pile of it. And it's like, okay, you can take a little bit, you can take a lot, and there's like a caution sign of it, like, careful, don't take too much. You might have a fucking brutal experience, but there's also this perception of a payoff too. And so because, that's interesting, because it has to be available to one of me, quote unquote, one of me, it has to be available to all of me all the time. In every variation, it's just how willing you are to recognize the illusion of it. Like, as I was saying before, it's an illusion. It's not like you're picking something that has any basis in reality. It's just getting caught in that and just running with it and convincing yourself along the way that it's a real thing that you're doing. Like, this is a legitimate thing that I need to defend and I need to build, and all of our conceptual ideas are like that. Like, there is a reality to everything. And beyond that, there is, which is most of what our experience is just varying depths of commitment to an idea. And that's like, someone who's open-minded or closed-minded, how committed they are to the conceptual idea. Someone who's super close-minded, super committed to a fucking made-up conceptual idea versus someone who is perceived to be more open-minded, aren't as committed necessarily to that conceptual idea. Although you can get overly committed to the idea that you're an open-minded person, and that keeps you caught in that because you're now something. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the worst thing to get stuck on, but it's still there's a difference. I am an open-minded person. You're still maintaining that identity. So it's just that, and that's what staying on the ball is settling upon that. And a lot of people settle upon, I'm a nice person. If you're a nice person, you're not everything. As soon as you're something, you're not everything, as Ray said last week. So careful with that one too, because that's another spot to get caught in.
It's interesting. I just want to add a little bit more spectrum to what we're talking about, because you can see why the mythology of the devil, or originally translated as the adversary, really came up, because that's what we're talking about, is identity, right? To different extremes, blinding God or blinding what is. But it's not just humans, right? Like, our capacity to create that illusion is really based upon the complexity of the form that we're in, right? Which is why reptiles, for example, don't go around comparing each other in terms of how good their fucking skin looks or something like that. Like, they're not to the same degree in terms of identity. They still have their own identification experience, for sure, because there always is one. There is always a me, right? But it's not to the same complexity or level by any means. And I find it really fascinating. I was mentioning this to somebody else earlier this week. I'm a cat person. I really like cats because I can slow down to where they are in the same way I could slow down to where Celeste used to be when she was a kid, and just resonate with them. But 2 years ago, we got a gecko, and I couldn't read it at all. Like, at all. Like, it just seemed like it would either be active or just turned right off. And so I was just like, so weird. And so I just spent a lot of time with it. And what I recognized was that I was moving at a pace that couldn't resonate with it. And as I slowed down, I started to see more of its mannerisms. I started to see more of its actual behavior, because I had slowed down enough to resonate with where that experience was coming from. But it wasn't to the same pace as me at all. Right? Same with dogs, right? Like, when you finally slow down and hang with your dog, it's like your dog finally connects with you. You're like, aha, here you are. The rest of the time you're running around at a different pace, thinking about time, thinking about concepts, thinking about the complexity of the experience that your form allows you to run through. So it's not just identity across the spectrum of humanity, right? Like, it's not just a spectrum of identity across the spectrum of humanity, but it actually is a spectrum of identity across all living things. All living things. And what's amazing is that the things with the least identity are the ones that serve the biggest fucking purpose. And by that, I mean plants. Right? Plant life has the least identity, the least reason to identify. It doesn't have any mobility for the most part, right? There's very little that it can do outside of just exist and grow, right? And yet it's the fundamental building block of everything that we can experience on top of it. All of our complexity couldn't exist without the simplicity of that form. And it's because we're not separate. It's all one complex form. It's all you. It's just that we tend to think of it in terms of plants, animals, and humans. But it's all the spectrum of awareness and the spectrum of identity.
And so, as you bring up, like, they're the building blocks of the earth. So they're the most useful in reality. Whereas, so if you think of it on a spectrum, like plants, say, no identity or very, very little identity. Humans, lots and lots of identity. Plants being very useful to the earth. Humans, quite frankly, being not that useful because they're focused on themselves. Like, it's about me. It's not about reality. Like, if anything, humans are probably on the end of not useful at all to actually detrimental to the earth. Not bad, but destructive in a lot of ways, and it's really just how much you recognize that you are. And it's not that plants are in there thinking, talking to each other like, oh my gosh, I'm everything. They're just being everything because they don't perceive division between themselves and everything. And so there's, and again, this isn't me saying like plants have brains necessarily, but they are intelligence. manifest. They are intelligence expressed. And so without the, limited pigeonhole to be looking through, their thoughts and concerns are naturally for the whole. Whereas humans' thoughts and concerns are primarily for me, for the illusion, for the idea of myself. And that impact is going to be at the cost of a lot of other things. Like, it's going to be at the cost of basically the rest of reality to a degree, whether it's through, building something for yourself, focused on yourself, a selfishness, or having a very negative idea of yourself. And, through that, like, you being reality, that's a detrimental impact on reality as the reality of what you are because of that idea. And so it's interesting that everything is on that spectrum of identity, and depending on how much it's also because of the complexity of humans, there's like a potential for impact too, besides just the reality of what the impact is. So humans' potential for impact is a lot higher than plants. Like, one human can potentially have a lot of impact, but impact is neutral. There is positive and negative impacts. So the potential for a positive impact is massive for each quote unquote individual human, but the potential for destruction is also fucking massive. So it's a tool, just like, social media. People like to say it's bad. It's just a tool. It's just a neutral tool that is capable of being utilized how we want, or, chainsaw or whatever. They're all tools. And there is a constructive or destructive way to use those things. This iteration, the complexity, the ability, our brain, our mind is fucking one of the most powerful tools ever. And we've just gotten caught in using it in very destructive ways, whether it's towards ourself or towards the rest of reality, based on how we perceive ourselves as being something separate. And where that kind of coin falls, is it, do I love myself or do I hate myself? If I'm very self-involved, that can be a positive or a negative side. And either way, it's going to have a detrimental impact on reality. Being that involved in your idea of yourself is just destructive in some way, shape, or form to reality. Whereas the lessening of that idea of yourself inevitably is more constructive. Even just the letting go of the illusion is constructive, in that it's all you. So as you let go, as your mind shifts, the whole mind of yours shifts. But yeah, humans, I think we have the most potential. Absolutely. And we're just so caught in that cloak of identity and that illusion. Fucking illusion. It's an illusion. It's not real. It's not real. It's not fucking reality. We're so lost in it that we're just destructive. And we've fallen on that end of the spectrum. And the shift is the letting go of that limited perception of yourself.
Yeah, because it is limited, right? Like, we were even talking about complexity in terms of there being different scales of complexity in general. And what I mean is that humans, because of our complexity, we have such a huge capacity to either blindly be destructive or align with our reality and actually nurture the world, like nurture nature, as it were. Because, like, if you look back at some of the Native Americans or some of the indigenous here on North America, they had there are shelves off the coast of BC, for example, under the ocean, where they showed clam beds that were actually deliberately created there. So it was basically like a clam farm. And these are over 1,000 years old. And they were made specifically to take advantage of the current, so that way it would create more clams naturally. So they knew how to align with reality without doing like factory farming and shit. And they could feed the entirety of their tribe just based on aligning with the world, using it to a better capacity, and not overfishing, not, just focusing on more, always living within alignment. And that's what happens when you're not over invested in identity, right? But if you are, well, then all of a sudden it's giant pipelines and smog in the air and creating plastics and doing all that other fun stuff because it's just in the name of profit and what I can do in this lifetime, right? Which is all based on identity. It's all based on that limited scope. And so there's that potential for destruction or creation there. But what's interesting is that still exists right down on the grass level, if you think about it, except it's a different scope. Like everything is built upon what we view as the simplicity of organic life or plants and whatnot. But the fact is that if bees disappeared, we'd be fucked in 4 years, right? If plants ever disappeared, everything would be fucked. Everything would be fucked. So while we have the potential for destruction, if we're not respecting how much we are from plants upwards, right, then we're literally hurting ourselves all the time. And we're undermining the very foundation of the complexity that we're all experiencing because we're too busy focusing on the individual complexity instead of the collective complexity that is all still us. It's all still you. You are the grass, right? You are the grass. The grass is what gives you the ability to be human. Okay. It's all connected. It's all you. But how often do you take that in? How often do you think about yourself that way? You typically don't. You don't think of yourself as the awareness of the world, right? And then from that, you can expand that out to the universe and galaxies and all that other fun stuff, right? But it really does start with understanding that everything that is right now is you.
Yeah, and that impact on yourself, I'm glad you brought that up because it's as much as, yeah, detrimental impact on reality or whatever, destructive, humans being destructive to reality. Like, we're fucking reality. So we're destroying the reality of what we are, even from the, conceptual limited idea of myself. But we think, we're doing all these things to build that. And like an example, and I don't know much about different industries necessarily, but from what I've heard, like the fashion industry is actually very harmful in a lot of ways. And again, I don't know the complexity of that and all the ins and outs, but why do we, want all the name brand stuff and all the super complex things to build the idea of me? Because it means something about me. Because if I wear this, it means this about me. And that's harming yourself. We have such a limited perspective of ourself that we don't see the impacts, and we don't think that like a little tiny percent of a percent impact from, being involved in that sort of thing is going to have impact on things, being overly invested in that. We just have, because we see ourselves as so limited, we don't see the impacts of the limited nature of maybe a quote unquote small impact that isn't actually small, because as the small impacts pile up, they're not so small anymore. And we just keep pushing the buck because like we think we're just this limited idea that's only going to be around for 80 to 100 years max. And so it doesn't matter how we do, but it does, because you're not what you think, because you're not going to die in 80 years. You're not going to die in 80 years. You're here forever. And so you might as well start taking some responsibility. And again, this isn't a sacrificial thing. Like there are it's freedom we're talking about, being in reality, being free in reality. Everything else, you think it's sacrificial. You're sacrificing a fucking illusion. You're sacrificing something that isn't real. So you're not sacrificing anything. You're just sacrificing where all your suffering stems from, basically. But that's why, the push, when people are like, why do you push against religion? Because there's a deeper thing here. It's reinforcing an illusion that's having an impact on all of me. It's reinforcing an idea, this cloak of identity that is taken over reality. It is something that's reinforcing it. So yeah, we're going to pick at all of them. We're going to pick at all the fucking identities because they're all hindering our ability. They're all reinforcing the illusion. I don't fucking care which one it is or how sensitive people are to it or how much of a fad it is right now. Any identity is on the fucking chopping block because it's all hindering our ability to recognize the truth of what we are. It's all reinforcing a fucking illusion that doesn't actually exist.
Oh, I hope we end up getting gun control for the next community topics episode. That'll be a lot of fun. This is an excellent place to end this episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. It is shorter, but I have to admit, man, we jam-packed a bunch of shit into this episode. So I'm thinking we're going to take more advantage of these slightly shorter episodes. We are going to take a break for 15 minutes, and then we're going to continue on Patreon for another hour in a tier 2 call. If you would like to continue this conversation with us, do so. Patreon.com/dualistic unity. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. This has been a blast.